Welcome to episode 67 of the Epic Classroom Podcast. I'm Trevor Muir, and this is where we explore how to make learning meaningful and dynamic and transformative, epic. So students don't just get through school, they thrive because of it. All right, thanks for listening to the very first podcast of 2026. So glad to have you here. I was just flying down last week to Columbia, South Carolina from here in cold, snowy Michigan. I was flying down to South Carolina to go and work with a big group of teachers, and I was really excited to get back on the road and travel and kind of have that whole experience all over again. But this was the first time I've traveled in about a month. And so I got on the plane and I get my seat and I go to pull out my AirPods and I realize they are completely dead. I was like, oh, that's not good. And then I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to read on the flight. And I go and pull out my Kindle and I realized I didn't download the book, my new book, for the flight. And so I didn't have my Kindle. And then they start the aircraft and they announce that the Wi-Fi is not being offered on this flight, this 2-hour flight to South Carolina. And so here I am without a podcast, without music, without a book, and without Wi-Fi for 2 whole hours. And I've got to be honest with you, I'm a little embarrassed to admit this to you, but I kind of panicked a little bit. I felt a little bit of anxiety. I'm like, what am I going to do for 2 hours without anything? I don't have anything to read on this flight or to listen to or to watch. It was going to be like the old days all over again. And so I just sat there and I looked out the window and I did some people watching and I read the instructions on how to exit a Boeing 737 safely. And I just sat there for 2 hours and I did nothing. And I got to be honest with you, it was quite boring. I was bored. I'm not sugarcoating it. I'm not going to be like, well, at least I was present and therefore I had a lot of fun. It's like, no, not exactly. I was kind of bored, but I got to tell you, in the midst of this boredom, I had some really fun ideas pop into my brain. And in this boredom, I just did some daydreaming and I thought about what's going to happen this year and some things that I could do. And I dreamt up some trips that I could do with my kids. And I was thinking about the talk I was going to give the next day to teachers. And it was just like this whole different experience of flying that I don't normally have. And that's kind of set my mind a-whirling a little bit about this idea of boredom and what happens when we're bored. That's what I want to talk about today. One of the great gifts of the 21st century is that you never have to be bored anymore, right? You don't have to be bored at a red light when you're sitting in your car. You don't have to be bored standing in line at the grocery store ever again. All you have to do is pull out that supercomputer in your pocket and pass the time with emails or headlines or puppy videos. The algorithm has really nailed me down as a big fan of puppies, and so it just sends me Instagram video after Instagram video of puppies, and I'm just not bored anymore, right? Like that's not something we really have to deal with. That's one of the great gifts of the 21st century. But one of the great curses of the 21st century is that you never have to be bored anymore. Right? Because that's something I was starting to figure out as I sat on this plane is my brain is going to different places because there's no external stimulation for them to go otherwise, for my brain to go towards. Instead, I just have to go internal with it and some really cool things happen, right? For all the purpose that technology serves. And there's a lot of purposes that all of modern technology serves. It sometimes feel like the primary purpose of all of our technology is the elimination of boredom, right? Like social media gives us this constant influx of dopamine, the good feeling of seeing something that feels satisfying over and over and over. Or tablets keep kids quiet in the car, or increasingly at dinner tables or at home when parents don't want to entertain them. They just give tablets to do this. It's entertaining, right? They're not bored. And because they're not bored, they're not complaining about being bored, right? AI. I talk about it a lot. It removes the tedium of writing. You know, as I was putting together my article this week and outlining this podcast, I got to be honest with you, it can get a little boring writing 2,000 words. It can be a little boring having to do research and crafting it and putting it together, right? And so nowadays, if you want, you can skip all of that boredom and just let AI do the work for you. It might not be as good. It might not be in your voice, but it removes the tedium and you don't have to be bored anymore. Like right in school context, laptops, they add sounds and visuals and games to dull learning experiences. We, students, adults, everybody, we don't have to be bored if we don't want to be anymore. But there's this emerging research that shows this lack of boredom isn't good for our brains. And psychologists are beginning to understand why. I was reading these studies that show that people asked to complete deliberately boring tasks before doing some type of creative challenge consistently generate more original ideas than those who are not bored first. During boring moments, the brain begins searching for meaning and connections and novelty all on its own. I was reading this study where they asked one group to come up with as many potential purposes for 2 paper cups. And so that group came up with their ideas, and they were mostly having to do with cups serving as containers, right? Because that's the traditional use of a paper cup. And so most of their answers were like, oh yeah, to carry water, or to carry solids, or whatever it is. It had to do with containers. But then a second group of people, before they were given that prompt, were asked to just sit in silence and not do anything for a certain amount of time. And then they were given the prompt, and they came up with way more creative responses for a paper cup. But then a third group of people were actually asked to do something really mundane first. They had to create a transcript of something they were hearing. They had to do something that didn't require any type of expertise or problem solving or any type of creativity. It was basically just copying from a dictionary. And then they were asked to come up with this creative solution to how many uses of a paper cup can you think of? And they came up with the most. During boring moments, the brain begins searching for this meaning and these connections, right? It's showed in the study that neural activity during boredom actually remains remarkably high, right? Our brains don't shut off when we're bored. It's nearly as active as when the brain is fully engaged. When you're bored, what researchers called the default state, it shifts towards organizing memories and simulating future possibilities and making unexpected associations. There's this value to being bored. I was at the dentist earlier this week with nothing to do as I laid in the chair but listened to the sound of the hygienist scraping my teeth, which, by the way, I didn't love that. Not my favorite experience in the world. But there's nothing you can do. At least at my dentist, there's no media. You just lay there for half an hour while they scrape your teeth. And for the first 10 minutes, I was wishing I could watch TV or look at my phone. But then after about 10 minutes, I began entering a different state of mind, just like on the plane. I started replaying a scene from this past weekend when I went deer hunting, which, by the way, was very successful. I got my first and only deer of the year, and I'll spare you all the details, but it was a big win. But as I'm laying there in the dentist chair, I'm starting to literally replay that memory of deer hunting, which was really fun. And then I started thinking about a piece of writing that I'm working on, something I've been kind of stumbling over this one part. And all of a sudden I came up with an idea for it that I just hadn't thought of before. It was the thing I've been searching for, and it came to me as they were scraping my teeth. And then I remembered an email that I forgot to send yesterday. It was really important. And so as I'm laying there, I'm thinking, oh yeah, I forgot to send that email. And I made a mental note to send it out after my dentist appointment. And then it hit me again. This is my brain on boredom. What feels like wasted time is often the brain doing some of its most important work. When we eliminate boredom entirely from our lives, we also eliminate the mental space where creativity and reflection and problem solving quietly take shape. So let's talk about what this means for students, because this is an education podcast. But let's first start by talking about what does this mean for us, right? What does it mean for us to allow ourselves, to force ourselves to be bored? Where are the quiet moments in your own life that you often fill with something? And what would it be like to allow those moments to stay quiet? I'll be honest with you. I know for me, it's driving, right? This is from my everyday life. Also flying on planes and there's plenty of examples, but for me, man, it's driving, whether it's playing podcasts or listening to music. I mean, I rarely drive in silence. Yet when I do exercise the discipline to allow a degree of boredom while I'm doing that, I do some of my very best thinking in the car. But for me, this requires discipline, especially as there's so many different forms of media competing for my attention. You know, I even bought this tool called a brick, which I should just say loud and clear, I don't know anything about brick other than that it's a really helpful tool for me. Don't get paid by them, but man, do I love it. Brick is this little like 3D printed cube that I keep up on my counter, and it locks every app on my phone that I use to cure my boredom. So what I do is I keep it on my counter, and when I touch my phone to this little plastic brick, Instagram and Facebook and Spotify and my email completely are inaccessible to me until I touch my phone to the brick again. And so, you know, if I know I'm going to go on a hike with my kids, I'll go and tap the brick because I have to have my phone. Somebody twists an ankle, I still want to be able to call emergency, right? Or maybe I don't usually, but if I need a map to get there, it doesn't lock up Google Maps, and so I can still have that on my phone as I'm driving. But then when I'm on the hike, any of that temptation to check my email or see if something's doing well on Instagram, I don't know, whatever is distracting to me, I can't access it, right? This is a discipline. It requires me to be bored. It's a self-imposed restriction that helps me be present and also to allow my mind to wander, because I've discovered that I need boredom, right? When I'm at a traffic light, I can't just sit there and be on my phone and be that annoying person that drives everybody crazy when the light turns green and I'm still sitting there because I'm looking down. I don't have that option because I'm forcing myself. With this technology, you could do it some other ways. Maybe you have more willpower than me and you don't need those external motivators, but I have to be present at the traffic light. I've got to let my mind be a little bored. Right? In line at the grocery store, I'll just stand there and look around. Like I can't be on my phone on my hike or whatever it is. My phone isn't an option. I need boredom. And if you're an educator or a leader, your work is inherently creative. From creative learning experiences to creative problem solving, one of your primary tasks is exercising the creative mind. And so to maximize that output in your work, but also just in your life to be a more creative person, you have to give your brain time and space to just be still and to not do anything. And so maybe you need to schedule a daily walk or hike where it's just you and your thoughts doing something. Maybe it's forcing yourself to drive in silence. Maybe it's eating lunch by yourself a few times a week and not watching or listening to anything while you do it, even though the temptation is there to do so, because you know that when you embrace boredom, it has this positive effect on you. So now, as we talked about that, and I really do challenge you to spend some time thinking about how can you build this discipline into your life. And I say this from experience as somebody who does not like being bored. I just don't want to sound like, oh, I've got this figured out. No, I don't. That's why I have to do certain disciplines that restrict it for myself. That's why I'm always looking for more stimulation. And so this is coming from somebody who doesn't like being bored. It has this positive effect, but we've got to make that happen. And we also have to give students opportunities to embrace boredom as well. Lord knows that society has led students to believe that they should never be bored, right? From gaming and tablets and just the constant media around them. But then even in school, right? Like there's just the gamification of everything and all of the technologies and the sound, all of this, it sends this message that you're not supposed to be bored. And then meanwhile, school has quietly trained students to believe that if they're not constantly busy or entertained or producing something, then they must be off task, right? And let's be honest, many students have learned to fear that empty space, right? The second a moment feels slower or uncomfortable, they reach for stimulation, right? They want the quick hit, the video, the game, the constant noise in the earbuds, the scrolling, the tab switching. And it's not necessarily because they're lazy, but because their brains have been conditioned to avoid boredom like it's something to escape. But again, boredom is not the enemy of learning. It's often the pathway to creativity and deeper learning. And so, like for ourselves, we need to create disciplines that are baked into our classrooms and help students understand the purpose of these disciplines. So here's a couple strategies that you could try to help build in boredom into your classroom. Strategy 1 is start with 2 minutes of silence. Before a writing prompt or before a discussion or before any problem solving or really before any creative tasks, give students 2 minutes of just sheer silence, quiet. No talking, no devices, not even instructions beyond just sit and think to yourself. And listen, this might not go smooth at first because this is strange to them, right? This is not something they're normally doing in school or in life. There's usually a task accompanying silence in school. But instead, no, it's like we're just going to do this because what we're doing is our brains are warming up before you're asked to produce and do something with it. So during these 2 minutes, when their brains are just silent, they're actually going to start generating their own stimulation, right? There's no external stimuli for their brains, and so they're going to have to go within for it. And then, after those 2 minutes of silence, when you introduce the task, they're going to likely be better primed to complete it. 2 minutes of uninterrupted silence with no particular task may be a huge challenge for students at first. Sitting with nothing to do is not typically normal for them, right? But explain the reasoning, have them reflect on it. What was this like, right? Where did your brain wander to? You don't have to do that every time, but getting them to understand, all right, here's the purpose of it, and this is why we're going to practice this often. And then what's going to happen is they're going to learn to cope with their boredom, and then hopefully even embrace it because they see that the skill is improving with repetition and it's making them more creative, and they might even enjoy a couple minutes of just silence. You might enjoy it as well. And again, school is so much about future preparation. This is teaching students how to practice this in their own lives when they're no longer in school. This might be a discipline worth developing after their time in the classroom. So it's about future preparation, but it's also about enhancing their creative work in the present. And if you can point that out to them, that, hey, this is valuable, being bored and then doing something, it's going to have an impact on the way that you work. And that kind of connects to strategy 2 with a little twist to it. So strategy 2 is do something repetitive first, kind of like that cup activity where they had to copy dictionary and then were given a creative task, pretty much modeling that when doing creative activities with students. So do something repetitive first and then going creative with something that's related to whatever that repetitive thing was. So give students a short task that is intentionally repetitive and predictable and low demand. There's not a grade attached to it. Something that doesn't require them to make decisions or perform for a grade, but puts them on autopilot so their brains start to wander. Put them into that default mode. And then after this short task, immediately shift to a related task, but one that requires creativity and problem solving. This might seem like busy work to students at first, so explain again the reasoning behind this exercise to them. You might say, hey, we are going to rev up our brains for creative work. And one of the best ways to do that is to let it wander first for a few minutes before we get started. So here's some examples of this. If you teach ELA, you might have students copy a short passage by hand, and then, as a follow-up, have them write a new ending to it. Copying by hand doesn't require any creativity or problem solving, but it's priming their brains to do this creativity of writing a new ending. Or you could have them create a list of 10 plain verbs and then have them upgrade them into vivid verbs, right? Doesn't require that much creativity. Then all of a sudden it requires creativity. There's a connection in the content of it, but one was about getting their brains primed and then one was executing on it. In math, you could have students copy a set of equations exactly as it's written, no solving, but then have them create a word problem that could match one of the equations. Or you could have them trace a simple graph or a geometric figure and then design a new version that tells a different story. Maybe it's steeper or wider or shifted or scaled. Requires a little bit more brain power now. Or in science, you could have them label a diagram and then design an experiment question based on it. Or you could have them record 3 boring measurements and then predict what would happen if one variable changed. It's all about setting them up with some boredom so they can use and exercise creativity. For many students, school is already inherently boring. And so it's crucial that we let them know the purpose behind these activities, that we're using boredom as a tool, right? Because that's what boredom really can be. It's a tool to help us become our most creative selves. Doing pre-creative, low-stimulation exercises isn't about adding boredom to their lives as a form of torture. It's about amplifying what their brains are capable of. In the same way, forcing ourselves to drive in silence or keep our phones put away in line at the grocery store or going to the dentist and saying, you know what, we don't need the TV, or even going on an airplane to Colombia and not having charged AirPods. It's not about making our lives duller. In fact, it's the opposite. When we embrace boredom, it sharpens our creativity. When we're left alone with our thoughts long enough, those thoughts can turn into something useful. And so that's my challenge for you this week, is where can you allow a little more boredom in your life? Intentional boredom. You know, as I said a moment ago, school's already inherently boring for a lot of students, and that's often because they don't understand the purpose and the meaning of it. Like, why am I learning this? Is it just because adults said so? Is it because that's what they put into the content standards? Is that just because that's what you do in school, is you learn this content? And when that's the posture students have towards school, that obviously can lead to boredom. But when we use boredom as a tool and we help them see that, hey, this is a precursor to some really dynamic creativity, all of a sudden they might be a little bit more willing to sit in silence because they know that it's going to have this benefit on the way that they create and think. And that lasts long after their time in the classroom. So find some ways to be bored. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you'd like to read some of this content, I've written it out into an article as well at trevormuir.com/blog. It's my latest article on there. I have a video about this content on YouTube if you want to check it out. And like always, thanks for consuming any of this content, and please feel free to share it with anyone who you think might benefit from some of these ideas. What a joy it is to get to present, to connect with, to write for, and to make a podcast for you wonderful educators. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Epic Classroom Podcast. My name is Trevor Muir, and I will create another episode soon. Have a great rest of your week.